Big welcome to everybody. Many thanks to all of you for coming. It's nice to see quite a full room. It's also nice to see faces that I'm not familiar with, as well as the ones I am familiar with. But I'm Elaine Charland. I'm the Director of Research and Knowledge Exchange in the School of Education and Social Work, where CERSI, so the Centre for Innovation and Research on Childhood and Youth, got it? I do know that, yeah. But we're Education and Social Work at the school, most of you probably know, within the university where CERSI is located. And as I say, I direct our sort of research and knowledge exchange. And Rachel asked me, and I only picked up the message, I have to say, not very long ago, whether I'd welcome everybody, so welcome. And also just say a very few words about what is effectively the theme, although it's not named in the title, I think, but a theme of today's workshop, which is about impact. The I word. For those of us who have been involved in the Research Excellence Framework, which for people who are not involved in universities is this process we go through every so often to judge and evaluate the quality of our work, research, and what we do with it. The word impact is something that kind of, induces severe migraine really as soon as you hear it, and large groans. But impact, the notion of impact is actually very much underpinning. We've got the title of today's workshop, which is really about research for the real world, so informing policy and practice in relation to children, young people and families. And I just want to say three things about, I think I want to say three things. As I said that, I'm reminded of when I first started doing interviews, empirical interviews many years ago in Cambridge with 6-year-old children, and I was doing an IQ test with the 6-year-old daughter of a well-known Cambridge academic, who when I asked her, tell me some reasons why we need policemen, said, well, there are 3 reasons. The first one is, the second one is, the third one is, and the fourth one, and the fifth. So I'll try not to do that. I'll say 3 quick things about impact. The first is to say impact, meaning in terms of the Research Excellence Framework, the way in which our research, the knowledge that we produce through our research practices, impacts upon, makes a difference to the world out there, the real world out there, that's what we mean by impact in kind of ref terms, and that's very much what you're talking about here. I think it's also fair to say that for many of us, the way that the systems like the ref that we've been accustomed to using now in universities envisage impact, it tends to be a rather linear kind of model that we do as extremely high quality research here in universities, and then we get it out there, and we not just have to get it out there, but we have to show that once it's got out there, wherever there might be, it's made a difference. So the second point that I wanted to come on to from that model is that the notion of impact is very connected, and that notion of impact with a rather linear kind of single direction of traffic is quite connected to a language that many of us are familiar with, of evidence-based policy and evidence-based practice. And when we think about how we generate and do policy and practice, we are very encouraged in lots of domains to make sure that our policy and practices are evidence-based, and that normally means research evidence. And there's an assumption in there that there's a kind of the excellent evidence gets produced, and then it gets put out there, and then it gets used. It becomes meaningful and used. Many of us, certainly in the kind of world of education and social work and related disciplines that certainly CERSI represents, have been doing quite a bit of thinking in the last while about the fact that what we know is that actually that direct linear relationship isn't actually what happens in the real world. And so there are a lot of other kinds of knowledges that inform the way practice happens and the way policy happens. There are politics that inform those as well. So evidence and research are one of many kinds of knowledges that might make a difference. In CERSI, and I think in our school in particular, I think we really pride ourselves on thinking in a much more multi-directional way about the relationship between research and what happens out there in the outside world. And that brings me to the third point really about the way that CERSI in particular models, and I think this workshop is modelling how we think about how research may make a difference in the real world of policy and practice, which is that instead of using a language of evidence-based or even evidence-informed or evidence-guided practice policy, we are much more interested in the ways that knowledges are, including research knowledges, are created, are assembled, are shaped, are mobilised, are configured, are moved, are circulated, are realigned, are reconfigured, and take their place in the end in a world where they can actually have a genuine relationship to the real world. In other words, we draw our research with and from what's going on in the real world, in the attempt of kind of shaping, reshaping, mobilising, and in the end making a difference to that real world we're talking about. I think that's what CERSI stands for. It certainly looks to me that that's what this workshop is going to stand for. So I've done my 3 points, and I'll hand over to Rachel.
Okay, thanks very much, Elaine. If I don't know you, I'm Rachel Thompson, and with Janet Boddy here, we direct the Centre for Innovation Research in Children and Youth, CERSI. Today's a fantastic and packed programme. We've got lots and lots of things happening, including, just to explain to you, the first half of the programme, we're going to be presenting some of the knowledge exchange work that's happening at the moment with our colleagues here who are members of CERSI. And then in the second section, we've got our 2 guest speakers from outside Des Holmes from Research and Practice, and Baroness Doreen Massey, hot from the Lords, to talk about the real world of making policy in terms of legislation. So some really different levels, really, and modes of engagement that are involved in affecting the world in terms of making a difference for children and young people and families. I'm not really going to say very much. We are recording this. Is it online? Is it being broadcast? It will be. It's not.
No, remote.
It's not live. Okay, fine. Sometimes it is, and then we have to include people on the screen who might be connected to it. So I'm not going to waste time now. Just to explain to you, we've got 4 short presentations. The way we'll do that will be short presentation, about 5 to 8 minutes. Then we'll have a little buzz at your table. So sit at a table with other people, because we'll give you a couple of minutes after each presentation to have a chat, to think, and you've got some stickers, some post-its, to just write down a few comments, questions, issues that arise for you and your tables, and to keep a record. And then at the end we're going to get some of that together. So we'll move on. We won't have question and answers, but we'll go at the end of that for those 4 presentations. We'll have a bit of a discussion in the whole room before having a break, and then going on to the guest speakers. So I'm going to start with Janet Boddy, who I'm not going to say anything at all, apart from that she's fantastic, and she will tell you about her work.
Thank you, Rachel. I could just stop with that, really, before I risk disabusing you of that notion. I'm delighted to be opening up our discussions today and to be talking about this piece of work. And I'm going to try and stick very strictly to the idea of just speaking for 5 minutes or so. So what I'm not going to do is actually tell you in much detail a great deal about this project and what we found and how we did it and so on. There are copies of the briefing paper on tables, just 1 copy, to encourage you to be workshoppy and swap it around. But you can download that and the long report in which we tell you what we did in enormous detail. You can download that from the website, and I'll show you the link to that as well. I think this is also a study which, for me, has brought together different interests in terms of European work that I've done over probably about the last 15 years now, in terms of studies about parent and family support and studies about work with children and young people who are placed away from home, children and young people living in placement or in care, to use the English terminology. And I think really what I wanted to start by saying is just a bit about why we do this kind of European research, and actually this project is a good example of that. That it's very much a collaboration between colleagues in different countries. And one of the key partners in this project, Hélène Joanne-Lambert, is sitting over here, will be speaking later on. And we're working on another European project together at the moment, actually. But we do this kind of European research not simply because it's nice to travel, although it is, not simply because it's interesting to learn about what other countries do, but because I think what cross-European or cross-national work does is actually give you a way of making the familiar strange, of taking your taken for granted assumptions about how you work with children and young people, how you design legislation, whether something's a right or a duty, or how it's framed within the rhetoric of the policy and the practice. And actually, by looking at how other people do things and how other countries do things, what the common issues are, you get this idea of kind of fresh perspectives, of learning from difference. And I think that was the first aim of this study, and has really been the first aim of all our cross-national studies. It's really important, I think, to think about this in terms of stimulating reflection and discussion. So it's not about evaluating effectiveness, and that's really important, because especially when you're doing research which is commissioned by a country's government, they often want you to go and find out what other countries do that works, so you can just import it and apply it. And as I hope you'll see through this example, it's not that straightforward. So what we're absolutely not doing is going and saying, oh well, you know, Denmark does this best, and Denmark spend most money on it, and therefore that's what we should do. So it's not about picking who's best, it's not about evaluating effectiveness, it's about getting shared perspectives on shared problems, and it's about stimulating reflection and discussion. And what that means is that you can learn from that how you might stimulate policy and practice development. And I've said in England here, but actually it's true for all the countries. And one of the bits of research design in this study, which was really exciting, was that we had, after we'd done country reviews and we'd done interviews with key stakeholders in each country, we held seminars in each country that we all went to, all the national partners went to, and we fed back to those key stakeholders and some other people. So people from policy, from DFE and its equivalent in other countries. And we talked to them, it was in a way functioned a bit like a reality check on what the reviews were saying, what the reviews were concluding. But it also let us start to think about unpicking those assumptions about how you do things. And one of the reasons I think that you can see how important that is, and I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but it's very important in cross-national work always to think about the contexts and to think about the concepts that you're studying within those contexts. And you can see, I mean, I talked about Denmark earlier on. Just looking at population size across the countries, it's clearly vastly different. Rates of looked after children look pretty different, in that England looks much lower than the other countries. It's more complicated than that, and more complicated in a way that I don't have time to tell you in my 5 minutes. So I'm very happy to talk about it at enormous length. But just the summary point I would make is that I don't think we're as different as that statistic makes it appear. Differences in the proportion of children in foster care and in residential care, again, we're quite different from the other countries. And all of this, if you think about the task of working with families who've looked after children, all of those contexts are a really important part of understanding that work. Whether the child's in a family placement or an institutional placement has an impact for things like where the work might be done. One of the other things that was really interesting, and I think comes through very starkly when you put together a table like this is the percentage of placements which involve some delegation of parental authority. So while the Children Act says that even when there's a care order, responsibility for the child is shared between parents and the local authority still has a legal authority to make decisions, for example, without the parents' consent, in a way that isn't the case in other countries, which isn't to say that parental involvement is straightforward in other countries. It's about that legal principle and the ideas behind that. Again, something I could talk much more about. But just to I want to just highlight some of the key findings. In English law, and I will talk about this from an English perspective, despite being a Scot. I'm an ex-Scot, and yes. So one of the key things that we found was that whereas the Children Act 89 talks in terms of contact, and there was a statutory duty for local authorities to promote contact, which is now being removed in the Children and Families Bill that Dorian's going to talk about. We found that, and in the context of systems where there's less delegation, legal delegation of parental authority, there's often more differentiation of what work with children and families is about. That doesn't mean that it's easy to do in practice, and this is a really difficult area of work in all the countries. But it's about recognising that contact isn't just one thing, and we need to tailor thinking about work with families, thinking about family involvement, in terms of the context of relationships between children and their birth families, not simply with their parents, but with their families as a whole. And recognising, I think, this really important point, that even when there's no contact, family forms part of your identity. So children and families need to come to terms with that separation. And that means that you need to distinguish between aims and approaches to work with families. So whether you're intervening with problems and addressing the issues that lead to a child's placement, whether you're recognising that that child may return home in future, maybe you don't know yet whether or not it's going to be possible to do that. You maintain relationships and involvement. You support wider family networks, because we know that care leavers rely on those networks, whether or not we like it, whether or not we think they have good relationships with their birth families. It's about recognising what family means, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be in a family, and thinking about what that means for the present and for future relationships. And I think, of course, all of this is complicated, and I've just given you a very brief taste of it. But I think it's because it's complicated, and because it is difficult in all of these countries in terms of, that's my stop sign, I just want to say one more thing about the to go back to the point that Elaine made, which is that it's very easy for us to say, well, you have to think about how you theorise family and family relationships. You have to capture the complexity of that. We also have to do research like this in such a way that service managers, service providers and local authorities can actually use this to inform thinking how they work with families. To do this in such a way that discussions in the Lords about amendments to the Children and Families Bill can take into account what contact actually means. So I'll stop there, thank you.
Well done.